The moment you dismiss as just another ordinary evening could become the very point where everything you've been quietly carrying begins to unravel. And what makes this so remarkable is that countless people will move through it without ever recognizing what is unfolding above them. Tonight, on August the 5th at 10:30, the last quarter moon arrives in Taurus, yet reducing this to an ordinary lunar phase would completely miss its significance. This is a moment charged with unusual intensity because only 2 days earlier, Chiron, the celestial body associated with the deepest, oldest, and most persistent emotional wounds, came to a standstill and began its retrograde motion in that very same sign. That means the place where pain has been preserved is also becoming the place where release is being demanded. Healing and exposure are occupying the exact same landscape, creating an experience that cannot simply be ignored. Whether you believe you are prepared or not, something beneath the surface is ready to split open. And if you continue moving through this period without awareness, the process may unfold on its own timetable instead of yours. What makes this even more significant is the truth that almost no one is discussing. This lunar phase is functioning as far more than a symbolic checkpoint. It resembles a powerful cosmic clearing, a force that begins removing everything you have continued to grip, even after it has stopped serving your growth. It is as though the universe is creating empty space before one of the strongest eclipse seasons in many years begins on August 12th. The invitation is simple, although far from easy. Release willingly now, or allow the eclipses to remove what you refuse to surrender later. The outcome may reach the same destination, but the experience will feel profoundly different depending on whether you participate consciously or resist until circumstances make the choice for you. Perhaps that explains why your body has recently felt strangely unfamiliar. You may have noticed a heaviness that refuses to disappear after a full night of sleep, a fatigue that settles into your muscles for reasons you cannot explain, or an invisible pressure resting inside your chest or deep within your stomach without any obvious physical cause. If that description feels uncomfortably familiar, remain with this journey, because there is one precise reason this sensation has emerged at this exact moment. And understanding it will transform the way you interpret everything your body has been trying to communicate. Before reaching that explanation, however, you first need to understand what is truly unfolding throughout this week, because this is not merely another energetic adjustment passing through the collective atmosphere. It is a moment of accountability, a meeting with truths that have been gathering strength long before today arrived. None of this suddenly appeared overnight. The tension you have been carrying has been quietly accumulating since August 1st, and the sequence of celestial events reveals exactly why. On August 1st, Venus, the planet connected with love, finances, beauty, relationships, and personal value, entered a difficult square with Black Moon Lilith. Lilith represents the parts of yourself that have been pushed into darkness, the qualities considered too intense, too authentic, too untamed, or too emotionally honest to comfortably fit inside the expectations placed upon you by others. As those two forces collided, one unavoidable question rose into consciousness. In what areas of your life have you made yourself smaller, simply to prevent conflict, maintain approval, or preserve the illusion of harmony? The following day, August the 2nd, the Sun also formed a challenging aspect with Lilith, intensifying the emotional atmosphere even further. This alignment stirred conflicts surrounding identity and awakened the painful sensation that simply expressing your authentic self somehow invites rejection or punishment. Many people may have found themselves wondering why ordinary conversations suddenly felt emotionally charged, or why long-buried insecurities unexpectedly resurfaced. Yet another important alignment unfolded that same day. The North Node, the point describing the direction your soul is evolving toward, formed a supportive sextile with Chiron. That connection quietly revealed something essential. The discomfort emerging inside you is not meaningless. The emotions coming to the surface are not random disturbances interrupting your life. Every ache, every uncomfortable realization, every memory demanding attention is attempting to guide you toward a destination your deeper self already recognizes, even if your conscious mind still struggles to understand the path. Then August 3rd arrived, bringing one of the most concentrated moments in this sequence, as Chiron stationed retrograde at 0 degrees Taurus. Whenever a planet stations, something extraordinary happens. Its apparent movement through the sky slows until it seems to stop completely. During that pause, its symbolism becomes dramatically amplified. Imagine standing directly beside an enormous speaker with the volume turned to its highest level. There is no possibility of pretending the sound does not exist. You cannot escape its vibration because it surrounds your entire body. That is how Chiron's energy behaves during a station. Every unresolved wound becomes impossible to overlook. Every hidden vulnerability becomes louder than the distractions you normally use to avoid feeling it. Then yesterday, August 4th, Mars, traveling through Gemini, formed an opposition with Lilith in Sagittarius, introducing an entirely different layer of intensity. This alignment carried restless, volatile, confrontational energy that sought expression through communication. Thoughts that had remained trapped inside your mind for months suddenly wanted to become words. Feelings you had repeatedly swallowed began pushing upward with undeniable force. Conversations became more reactive, disagreements appeared unexpectedly, and beneath everything there emerged a fierce hunger for freedom that many people struggled to explain logically. It was as though every suppressed truth had reached its breaking point and demanded the right to exist. None of these alignments occurred in isolation. Every single one has been preparing the emotional landscape for this exact day, culminating with the last quarter moon in Taurus at 13 degrees and 40 minutes. When this lunar phase reaches its peak, it shines directly upon the hidden cost of remaining where you have become comfortable. Comfort is rarely free. It quietly asks for payment over time, and often that payment comes through your vitality, your authenticity, your creativity, or your peace of mind. Pause for a genuine moment and allow yourself complete honesty. Somewhere within your current life, there is already a situation you know no longer supports who you are becoming. You have sensed it repeatedly, perhaps each morning before your day even begins. It may be a career that reliably provides financial security while gradually draining your spirit. It may be a relationship that appears perfectly acceptable to everyone observing from the outside, while privately leaving you emotionally disconnected whenever the world is not watching. It could even be the place you live, the daily rhythm you have carefully constructed, or an entire lifestyle built around an identity that no longer reflects the person you have quietly become. The reason you continue remaining there is not because it nourishes you or brings genuine fulfillment. The deeper reason is far more complicated. Walking away feels more frightening than continuing to endure what already hurts. Familiar suffering convinces the nervous system that predictability equals safety. The unknown, even when it contains possibility, appears threatening simply because it has not yet been experienced. Hidden beneath years of conditioning lives a belief that whispers the same message whenever change approaches. If you release what you have now, you will be left with nothing. That belief has silently shaped countless decisions, keeping you circling through the same painful patterns again and again. It is the invisible chain beneath every hesitation, every delay, every compromise that slowly distances you from your authentic life. The last quarter. Moon arriving today has not appeared to comfort that fear. It has arrived to bring the cycle itself to its conclusion, and understanding how that ending unfolds is the next piece of this unfolding story. What if the hardest part of this moment is not what you are being asked to face, but what you have been refusing to release for far too long? That is the hidden truth behind the last quarter moon, because this phase of the lunar cycle has never been about gathering more. It has always been about dismantling what has reached the end of its purpose. Imagine standing in the middle of late autumn, watching leaves drift from towering branches. They are not falling because the tree has failed. They are falling because life itself understands that survival sometimes requires surrender before renewal can begin. Energy must be withdrawn from what can no longer grow so it can nourish what has not yet appeared. That is the deeper purpose of this moon. It arrives to separate you from what has already completed its role, clearing away emotional weight that has quietly occupied your inner world long after it stopped supporting your future. Yet this particular last quarter moon carries a level of intensity that makes it impossible to compare with an ordinary lunar release. The reason is found within the fixed square unfolding across the sky. The sun is traveling through Leo while the moon stands in Taurus. Both belong to the fixed signs. Both cling tightly to stability. Both instinctively resist transformation even when change has become necessary. Leo continuously urges you toward greater visibility, asking you to embrace courage, creativity, authenticity, and the willingness to risk being fully seen. Taurus speaks an entirely different language. It values security, familiarity, consistency, and the preservation of everything that feels dependable. These two powerful forces now pull in opposite directions, leaving your heart suspended between them. One side of you longs to move beyond the limits that have confined you. Another part refuses to loosen its grip because uncertainty appears far more frightening than remaining where you already know the outcome. That inner conflict may explain why your emotions have felt unusually intense. You are not simply wrestling with circumstances. You are witnessing two survival instincts competing for control. During this moon, the universe begins relaxing that desperate grip, one finger at a time. Whether you willingly release what no longer belongs in your life or continue resisting until external events intervene remains entirely your choice. But the process itself has already begun. Earlier, I mentioned the strange heaviness many people have been carrying, the exhaustion that refuses to disappear regardless of how much sleep they get, the unexplained pressure settling into the body without any obvious physical explanation. That sensation is not disconnected from the astrology unfolding now. Chiron has just stationed retrograde at the very beginning of Taurus, at 0 degrees and 52 minutes. This placement matters because it occurs at the entrance of the sign rather than somewhere deeper within it. It represents the threshold where the themes of Taurus first emerge in their purest and most foundational form. Taurus governs the physical body, the relationship you maintain with your material existence, your connection with money, nourishment, comfort, rest, stability, and even your ability to feel at home within your own skin. As Chiron turns retrograde from this exact position, it begins uncovering one of the oldest emotional injuries. Many people carry the question of whether they truly deserve to exist, fully occupy space without apology, receive enough to meet their needs, and allow themselves genuine rest without drowning in guilt. Because Chiron is now moving retrograde, attention naturally shifts inward instead of outward. It becomes increasingly difficult to blame outside circumstances for the emotional weight rising to the surface. The economy cannot explain it completely. Your career cannot carry all the responsibility. Neither can your relationships. The deeper story is unfolding inside you. It is rooted within the invisible framework that has shaped your sense of worth for so many years that you may not even remember when it first began. That hidden architecture has supported countless decisions throughout your life, even while carrying fractures that have never truly healed. This is why your body may feel unusually heavy during this period. Your nervous system is processing something much older than the events happening around you today. It is responding to emotional programming that likely began during childhood and continued strengthening through years of repeated experiences. Generation after generation, many people have absorbed the message that personal value depends upon constant productivity, physical appearance, measurable achievement, or financial success. Those beliefs eventually settle inside the body until they become automatic responses rather than conscious choices. The last quarter. Moon is not demanding that you erase those wounds overnight because Chiron has never promised instant healing. Instead, it asks for something both simpler and far more courageous. It asks you to stop looking away. It asks you to remain present with the wound instead of organizing your entire existence around avoiding the discomfort it creates. The painful irony is that the emotional defenses you carefully constructed to protect yourself have gradually transformed into the very structures limiting your freedom. Walls built for safety have become walls that restrict breathing. Habits created for protection have become habits that quietly drain your spirit. That realization brings us to the 3 releases this moon now places before you, and these are not gentle invitations that can easily be postponed. They arrive with unmistakable urgency because they represent patterns whose time has expired. The first concerns the belief that safety can only be secured through money, social status, possessions, or material accumulation. At some point, your life taught you to connect survival with external resources. Perhaps your early years were shaped by scarcity. Perhaps you witnessed someone close to you lose everything they depended upon. Perhaps society repeatedly reinforced the message that financial success determines human value. Those experiences understandably created protective beliefs, and at one time those beliefs may have helped you endure uncertainty. Yet over time that protective instinct slowly changed. Instead of guarding your well-being, it began controlling your decisions. It became the invisible force convincing you to remain inside work that steadily empties your soul. It became the reason you continue accepting situations that quietly erode your dignity because leaving appears too risky. It became the voice encouraging endless accumulation, relentless overworking, and constant vigilance, while convincing you that genuine rest is dangerous. Somewhere deep within your subconscious, vulnerability became associated with survival itself, making relaxation feel almost impossible. Against this background, the last quarter, Moon forms its square with the Leo Sun, the part of the sky representing your authentic identity, your creative life force, your courage to shine exactly as you are. That square presents a question that cannot easily be ignored. How much of your genuine vitality have you traded away in exchange for the illusion of financial certainty? How much of your natural brilliance has been gradually dimmed simply to preserve stability and maintain what feels safe? The invitation of this release is not asking you to resign from your job today or abandon everything you have responsibly built. Its purpose reaches much deeper than any immediate external action, and understanding that deeper transformation is the next step in this unfolding journey. The true release this moon is asking for has nothing to do with abandoning responsibility or making reckless decisions overnight. Its deeper purpose is far more profound. It is inviting you to cut the invisible cord that has quietly tied your personal value to your financial value for far longer than you may realize. Somewhere along your journey, those 2 ideas became inseparable. You slowly began believing that the number attached to your income, your possessions, or your achievements somehow measured the worth of your existence. At first, that belief may have appeared practical, even necessary, because it helped you navigate a world that often rewards performance more than authenticity. Yet over time, the cost became impossible to ignore. Every decision made only to preserve security demanded another small sacrifice, another dream postponed, another desire silenced. Another piece of your authentic identity quietly traded away in exchange for the promise of stability. Eventually, the exchange stopped feeling temporary and became your normal way of living. Without realizing it, you began financing the illusion of safety with pieces of your own spirit, and now the emotional price has grown heavier than the protection it once provided. This moon arrives to reveal that imbalance, asking you to recognize that genuine self-worth cannot continue depending upon external measurements that will always fluctuate. The second invitation reaches even deeper because it touches the relationship you have with the one place you can never leave, your own body. This lesson is subtle enough that many people may overlook it completely, yet once you recognize it, you cannot unsee it. Taurus governs the physical body, and with Chiron moving retrograde through Taurus, one of the greatest emotional disconnections of modern life is being illuminated. Many people have gradually forgotten how to listen to their own physical experience. The body has become something to manage, optimize, criticize, or push beyond its natural limits, rather than something deserving of compassion and partnership. Endless expectations have taught people to measure themselves against impossible ideals, forcing them to ignore exhaustion, suppress emotion, and override every internal signal asking them to slow down. Instead of listening, many have learned to distract themselves through constant stimulation, endless scrolling, relentless work, artificial energy, or countless other habits that keep uncomfortable feelings buried beneath the surface. Earlier, I mentioned the strange heaviness that so many have been experiencing recently, the overwhelming fatigue that remains even after resting, the sensation that every movement requires more effort than it should, as though gravity itself has become stronger. The deeper truth is not that your body has suddenly failed you. It is that your body has finally stopped allowing you to ignore what it has been carrying. Chiron's station has awakened a profound recalibration within your nervous system. Emotional burdens that have remained hidden for months, perhaps even years, are no longer willing to stay beneath conscious awareness. They are asking to be acknowledged through physical sensation because the mind alone has refused to hear them. Your body is no longer willing to remain silent while your emotions continue waiting in the background. The last quarter moon invites an entirely different relationship with yourself. Rather than approaching your body as something that must constantly be controlled, corrected, or disciplined, it asks you to begin honoring it as an ally that has faithfully carried every chapter of your life. It encourages you to stop punishing yourself through endless deprivation, stop denying yourself meaningful rest, and stop evaluating your worth according to appearance or productivity. The long cycle of shame, separation, and treating yourself as though you were nothing more than a machine has reached its closing chapter. Whether that chapter truly ends depends entirely upon your willingness to participate in this release instead of resisting it. The third, and perhaps most emotionally difficult invitation, concerns the place where comfort quietly transformed into confinement. This lesson is especially challenging because comfort rarely announces itself as a prison. It presents itself as familiarity. It feels dependable. It offers predictability during uncertain times, making it appear like the safest place available. That comforting appearance is precisely what gives it so much power. The fixed square formed between Leo and Taurus represents two unwavering forces pressing against one another without either naturally wanting to move. Leo continually reminds you that your life contains unrealized potential, encouraging you to express yourself more boldly and live with greater authenticity. Taurus answers with another voice entirely, asking what might happen if every familiar source of stability disappeared. Those competing messages create the hesitation many people have been living inside. They remain within relationships that stopped evolving long ago. They continue building careers that no longer inspire them. They hold tightly to familiar routines, familiar environments, and familiar identities that satisfy everyone else's expectations while quietly abandoning their own. They remain not because those situations continue bringing fulfillment, but because uncertainty feels more frightening than disappointment. The unknown awakens every instinct Taurus naturally tries to avoid. Yet there is a truth about comfort that often remains invisible until much later. Comfort does not remain unchanged forever. Left untouched, it slowly begins to decay. What once offered protection gradually becomes restrictive. What once provided stability eventually limits growth. What once reduced fear can slowly become the very thing that drains vitality from everyday life. Choosing familiar unhappiness instead of unfamiliar possibility creates a repeating emotional cycle, and this last quarter moon has arrived specifically to interrupt that pattern. If you consciously choose not to dismantle it now, the approaching eclipses may accomplish the same outcome through circumstances beyond your control, and eclipses rarely operate with gentleness when overdue change has been postponed. This realization leads directly into what comes next, because today's moon is only one chapter within a much larger unfolding sequence. It represents the final opportunity to clear unnecessary weight before an entirely different doorway opens. On August 12th, exactly 1 week after today, a total solar eclipse arrives in Leo at 20 degrees. This is not a small astrological event passing quietly through the calendar. It stands among the most powerful eclipses of the entire year. Its path of totality will extend across the Arctic, Greenland, Iceland, and into Spain, bringing sudden daytime darkness to regions beneath its shadow. Every solar eclipse functions as an amplified new moon, carrying extraordinary potential for dramatic beginnings, unexpected transformations of identity, and the emergence of completely new life trajectories. Because this eclipse unfolds within Leo, its message centers upon the heart, authentic self-expression, creativity, courage, and the willingness to stand fully within your own light. Yet one essential condition exists. You cannot fully embrace a new beginning while still carrying emotional structures that belong to an ending. The rigid attachments associated with the Taurus comfort zone, the persistent fear of scarcity, the fractured relationship with your body, and every outdated pattern built upon survival rather than authenticity must first be released. Otherwise, the Leo eclipse may not feel empowering at all. Instead, it could feel as though life is dismantling the very foundations you have struggled hardest to preserve, not because the eclipse is punishing you, but because those foundations were already meant to be surrendered during the week leading up to it. That is why today's last quarter moon matters so profoundly. It prepares the inner landscape for what the eclipse hopes to awaken. The eclipse carries extraordinary opportunity, yet its gifts become accessible only after the necessary inner work has been embraced. Even then, the story continues unfolding. On August 28th, a deep, partial lunar eclipse appears in Pisces, with nearly 93% of the moon covered by the Earth's shadow. During that event, the moon will take on a deep copper-red appearance, visible across the Americas, Western Europe, and Africa. That eclipse becomes the emotional wave that completes the process. Washing through everything, the Leo solar eclipse first opened and carrying the transformation into an even deeper level of release, preparing the next chapter that is waiting beyond the horizon. If the attachments rooted in the material world remain untouched after the last quarter moon on August the 5th, and if the invitation to embody a new version of yourself during the Leo solar eclipse on August the 12th is left unanswered, then the partial lunar eclipse arriving in Pisces on August 28th becomes far more emotionally overwhelming. Instead of simply witnessing change, you may find yourself immersed in the emotional residue created by everything you continued carrying after its purpose had already ended. Two eclipses unfolding within the same month are never an ordinary occurrence. They do not whisper. They do not gently suggest that transformation might be helpful. Together, they resemble the universe pressing the reset button twice within an incredibly short span of time. If your hands are still wrapped tightly around an identity, a habit, or a chapter of life that has already reached its conclusion by the time those eclipses fully unfold, you will likely experience that resistance through every layer of your being. As the moon continues its passage through Taurus tonight, something may begin unfolding not only emotionally but physically as well. You could suddenly notice tension leaving parts of your body that you never realized had been clenched for months. A single deep breath may rise from somewhere that feels older than conscious memory, almost as if your body has been waiting for permission to exhale for years. Some people may sense an unexpected lightness spreading across their shoulders after carrying invisible weight for far too long. Others may experience an unfamiliar wave of emotion filling the chest without any obvious trigger or explanation. This is the chironic process expressing itself through lived experience. The body begins releasing accumulated pain, deeply stored fear, and survival patterns that have remained embedded within the nervous system for an incredibly long time. Some individuals may suddenly find themselves crying without understanding why the tears have appeared. Others could notice subtle sensations moving through their hands, their feet, or along the back of the neck, almost like gentle currents of electricity, reminding them that something beneath ordinary awareness is shifting. Still, others may simply feel profoundly tired, yet this exhaustion will not resemble ordinary fatigue. Instead, it may feel like the relief that follows, finally placing an impossibly heavy burden onto the ground after carrying it for years without realizing how much strength it required every single day. Whatever form this experience takes, resist the temptation to escape it. Do not immediately distract yourself. Do not bury it beneath constant stimulation or endless scrolling, simply because the sensations feel unfamiliar. Allow yourself to remain present. This is what genuine release often feels like. It rarely appears dramatic or polished. More often, it unfolds through vulnerability, discomfort, emotional honesty, and unmistakably physical sensations that remind you healing involves the entire human experience rather than the mind alone. Yet beyond that temporary intensity exists something many people have not experienced in a very long time. There is lightness waiting beyond the release. There is space where heaviness once lived. There is a quiet sense of freedom that cannot emerge until the old emotional weight has finally been allowed to leave. The days immediately following this lunar phase begin revealing why this process mattered. Once the last quarter moon completes its work, the atmosphere starts changing with surprising speed. On August 6th, Venus enters Libra, the sign it naturally rules. This movement marks the end of the highly analytical, self-critical atmosphere created while Venus traveled through Virgo, an energy that has encouraged many people to examine themselves through an unforgiving inner voice for weeks. As Venus settles into Libra, that emotional climate begins softening. Balance gradually replaces harsh judgment. Harmony becomes easier to recognize. Relationships, matters of the heart, and interactions with others begin carrying a noticeably gentler quality than before. Then, another important shift arrives on August 9th as Mercury enters Leo. This transition supports the emergence of confidence, encouraging you to express aloud the truths you have only recently begun accepting within yourself. Ideas that previously remained hidden gain the courage to be spoken. Your authentic voice becomes more difficult to suppress because your inner reality is finally beginning to align with your outward expression. The momentum continues building until August 15th, when Mercury forms a conjunction with Jupiter in Leo. This alignment represents extraordinary expansion, fresh opportunities, and the possibility of seeing life through a far more optimistic perspective than the one you carried before. Yet that optimism is not random. It grows naturally from the difficult inner work completed beforehand. The conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter becomes the symbolic reward for your willingness to release what no longer belonged in your life. It is as though the universe responds by revealing possibilities that remained hidden while your attention was occupied by emotional burdens that had already expired. New opportunities become visible only because space now exists for them to enter. Expansion requires openness. and openness cannot emerge while every available part of you remains occupied holding on to yesterday. This is why the sequence unfolding throughout August matters so deeply. The eclipses are not waiting for anyone to become comfortable with change before they continue their work. That is why today represents something much greater than another ordinary lunar phase. It is a threshold separating two entirely different ways of living. On one side stands the version of yourself that repeatedly chooses familiarity instead of vitality, continuing to exchange authentic living for the illusion of safety, while quietly convincing yourself that someday conditions will finally be perfect enough to begin fully living your life. Meanwhile, your deepest aspirations gradually become quieter beneath the weight of postponement. On the opposite side waits another possibility entirely. It is the version of yourself prepared to meet the eclipses with openness rather than resistance, prepared to welcome expansion because unnecessary weight has already been released, prepared to move beyond mere survival into genuine participation with life itself. The career you continue remaining within, despite knowing it, no longer reflects who you are. The relationship you continue holding, even after growth has stopped the familiar environment you have mistaken for lasting security. Every one of those choices carries a hidden cost. The purpose of today's moon is not to condemn those decisions or make you feel ashamed for the path you have walked until now. Instead, it illuminates the true price those choices have required, so that one final opportunity exists to choose differently before the approaching eclipses begin accelerating events beyond your personal timetable. Once August 12th arrives, the experience begins unfolding along two very different paths. Those who willingly released unnecessary burdens, trusted the process, and opened themselves to transformation stepped forward into remarkable new possibilities. Those who refused to loosen their grip, who continued resisting inevitable change, and who remained attached to familiar suffering instead of embracing unfamiliar freedom, may still experience transformation. But instead of consciously walking toward it, they find themselves being carried by forces they no longer control. The universe is not demanding complete certainty today. It is not expecting every answer to appear before you take your next step. It asks for something much simpler, yet infinitely more courageous. Open your hands. Stop holding so tightly to circumstances that have already completed their purpose. Allow yourself to believe that beyond release, there is not emptiness waiting to punish you. There is freedom waiting to welcome you. The moon is almost here, and its movement will not pause for hesitation. Before we reach the end of this message, I sincerely appreciate you spending this time with me and sharing this journey. If this reflection resonated with you and you would like to continue exploring these powerful astrological moments together, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this growing community. Your support truly means a great deal. I would also love to hear what you have been experiencing during this extraordinary period, so feel free to share your thoughts and personal insights in the comments. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself and stay connected for more meaningful explorations of the wisdom written across the sky.